Hey everybody, this is Derek. Today is October 5th, 2019. In this video, we're going to be talking about the numerology of the death of actress Diahann Carroll, who passed away yesterday after a 22-year battle with breast cancer. It was a comment on my video yesterday that brought me to this death. Now, in that video, I talked about what looked like the hoax death of a Norwegian man who was killed by his father-in-law on accident while trying to surprise him. Now, I talked about how that ritual was related to a solar eclipse. And in my videos, I talk about how all of these major news stories are related to the dates on which total solar eclipses occur. Of course, total solar eclipses, pretty rare occurrences. We only see about 7 of these per decade. So I'm pretty consistent in measuring to these events. Now, in that video, I mentioned how sometimes I measure to total lunar eclipses. And the main difference is the numerology of the person involved. And I get a perfect example right away from one of my astute commenters who mentions Diahann Carroll died, and the name Diane does come from the name Diana, which is the Roman moon goddess. So, the same day I make this video, we get the death of someone whose numerology is very closely related to the moon. Now, in order to truly understand numerology, you also have to have an understanding of the language of Gematria, the ancient practice of coding numbers into words. Ancient languages, like Hebrew and Greek, did not have separate lettering and numbering systems. And the fact that we do in English is truly a trick on the brain. But we'll talk about the numerology both in Gematria and dates on the calendar, and some of the stunning things I found with the death of Diahann Carroll. To begin with, here we have the name of someone whose birth name was different. Carol Diane Johnson was how she was born, and of course they will go with names that sound better on stage, but why would they add an L to her name? I guess maybe to make it look more like a last name. In the language of Gematria, the name Diahann Carroll, when spelled correctly, has the same gematria in the 4 base methods that I just showed on the screen as the phrase human sacrifice. Now, whether or not this woman was murdered is not necessarily a topic of this video, as it's pretty clear she did die of breast cancer. But numerology does really crack open a window to the creepy side of this world. So both of these possibilities will be explored. Now, with capital letters taken into account, the name Diana sums to 57. This cipher, the first one most of us see in kindergarten class, where it alternates capital and small letters. And as it's mentioned, the name Diana comes from the Italian goddess of the moon. Using the standard alphabetic order, 1 through 26, the word moon sums to 57. With the alternate spelling Diane, notice how we get 51 in ordinal. This is the reverse value of moon. Diahann Carroll was best known for her time on the show Julia, which is mentioned in the New York Times headline. She was a Broadway actress first, but reached national stardom with this television show. Notice how the name they gave her in this series, Julia Baker, sums to 90 and 36 in reduction using the rules of numerology. The phrase the moon also equals 90 and 36. Now, when we're talking about the moon, I'm pretty consistent in talking about how 13 is essentially the ultimate number of the moon. Now, this is because there are 13 lunar phases every couple of years. In fact, 7 of every 19 years, which completes the Metonic cycle. The word moon begins with the 13th letter, M, and it ends with the 13th letter in the reverse order. Both the moon and 13 have values of 99. Notice the moon in reverse and 13 in ordinal. So how interesting is it that, first of all, the name Diane, as it's spelled, sums to 103 in Jewish Gematria. This cipher I also teach in every video, based in the ancient Latin alphabetic order. What was the world's primary alphabet for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Not only do we get a number that's a lot like 13 here, remember zeros are ignored in numerology, but the name Diahann Carroll sums to 130 in the English alphabetic order. In fact, if you add her character's name onto her name, you get a 103 in reduction. Using the reverse alphabetic order, the number 13 sums to 117. Now this is where it gets pretty interesting. We're going to take a peek at Sumerian Gematria. This cipher is the alphabetic order, but multiplied by 6. 6 being the number of time, of course, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, 24 hours in a day divisible by 6, 12 months in a year, same thing. Anyway, Diane, her full name, Carroll Diane Johnson, as she was born, sums to 1,170. I'm going to try to remember this 87 for the end of the video. This is really important too. But remember the 1170, a lot like the number 13. She was born on July 17th of 1935 and died October 4th this year, just yesterday. This means at the time that she died, she was 1,010 months and 17 days old. And this is significant because here we're measuring in months. And as I'm trying to explain here, the name Diana closely linked with the moon, as is this woman's numerology. So here we have a 1117 sequence in her age at death. Now remember, she was known for her appearance on the show Julia, or her starring role. When this show debuted, she was in her 12,117th day since birth. Measuring from the debut of that series to her death was 51 years and 17 days. Again, the 117 in the sequence. In fact, the name Diane sums to 51 in the alphabetic order. Her death falls 1 year and 71 days before next year's total solar eclipse, the next one to occur. We'll talk more about eclipse numerology in a bit. But I do find it interesting that she died at age 84. Total lunar eclipse sums to 804 in Jewish Gematria, and this is, of course, the death of a woman whose numerology is very close to the moon. Again, she died of breast cancer. Breasts equals 84. Now, the conspiracy theory about Gematria, one that I still kind of hold, is that these people, it's one of the two things, right? It's either that whoever's running this Kabbalistic Hollywood knows when these people are going to die, or these people might be getting murdered. Now, again, if they are getting murdered, it's in a very advanced fashion, one that's a little scary. But I also entertain the possibility that they just know when they're going to die and they have an advanced understanding of numerology. Either way, this is pretty fascinating stuff. Now, we looked at the date that the show debuted, which we'll look at more in a little bit. But the date that the show ended, also significant. Notice how when the show ended, which was March 23rd of 1971, look how old she was on this date. We already talked about the significance of 130 and 13 being the number of human sacrifice. This woman named Diahann Carroll. And then as far as the 33, that's the other major number of sacrifice we talk about. And the name Diane equals 33. When you spell out 33 in Jewish Gematria, it has the same Gematria as ritual human sacrifice. This being a biblical number, remember it was Judas who betrayed Jesus, which led to that sacrifice in the New Testament. You may have seen English extended Gematria on the screen earlier. This uses the current 26-letter alphabet. And when you add Diahann Carroll and her character's name, Julia Baker, in English extended, you get a value of 895. If you measure from this year's one and only total solar eclipse on July 2nd to the date that she died, you get a span of 3 months and 3 days. Remember the name Diahann, summing to 33. Also, Diahann Carroll Julia, the name of the series, gives you a 330 in reverse. And how about this? I didn't even notice 84, the age at which she died, in reduction. So I feel like I'm making some sense here. Hopefully I'm about to make a little more. Now, when this show debuted, again, Julia, debuting September 17th of 1968. She was born on the 17th, and this show debuted on the 17th. This is no coincidence. This means she was exactly 398 months old on the date of this show's premiere. Well, 398 is a pretty interesting number to me because this is the Jewish gematria of eclipse sacrifice. By the end of the video, we will look at the English value too and how this is definitely significant here. But what's wild to me is that this show ran for exactly 86 episodes. And that's wild because the name Diahann Carroll equals 86 in reverse. Remember the phrase blood sacrifice and human sacrifice also sharing this 86. This being a term for offing someone, when they're 86th, they get killed. So remember how the number 13 was coded in earlier. We started off pretty much the first half of this video talking about it. Well, think about the day before she died. Her last full day alive would have been October 3rd. The date written 10/3, like another 13. Well, if you measure from that date to the date of the next total lunar eclipse, which does not occur until May 26th of 2021, she died a span of exactly 86 weeks before. Or I should correct myself, her last full day alive, 86 weeks before. If you instead look at the most recent total lunar eclipse to the date that she died, I think this is significant also because it's exactly 8 months and 2 weeks. The name Julia in the reverse alphabetic order, summing to 82. And as far as the 53 and 17 in the ordinal ciphers, check out the numerology of the date she died, 53 and 17. So this does appear to be a tightly woven ritual. And it goes even deeper. Looking at the astrological side of things, Diahann Carroll was born in mid-July. And mid-July is the time of Cancer. Cancer running from... Wait a minute. Yeah, June 21st to July 23rd. Okay, I knew this is right. Talking about the modern astrology, it's different. But the time of Cancer, as we recognize it in Western astrology, is in mid-July. So she was born in the time of Cancer. And cancer, ultimately, is the disease that claimed this woman's life. Now, it sounds crazy, but her casting as Julia in that show appears to be a foreshadowing of this fact. Notice how Julia sums to 37 in the only cipher we haven't looked at yet. Reverse reduction. The name Baker, her last name on the show, also summing to 37. The word Cancer sums to 37 in reverse. And the series, if you include the end date, it lasted exactly a span of 30 months and 7 days. In trigonal gematria, this is where we use the alphabetic order, but associated triangular numbers for each number instead. Here, the name Julia equals 410. This is the same as breast cancer in Jewish gematria. And think about the date she died. October 4th, or the 4th of October, written 4/10. And it's wild. You know, the show's first anniversary, she was exactly 410 months old. But what trips me out is that she was first diagnosed with breast cancer in the year 97. The phrase eclipse sacrifice equals 97 with the S exception. Breast equals 97, and death equals 97. And what's so wild about this fact, diagnosed in 1997, and her name is Diahann, right? And we're talking about how this is very significant to the moon, how it's related to the name Diana. Well, there was another very, very famous Diana who died in the year 97, the same year that this woman was diagnosed with breast cancer. You may remember Princess Diana died on August 31st of that same year. So it's interesting, right? 22 years later, after the death of Diana, forget what sums to 22, but if you measure from August 31st to October 4th, the number of days between the deaths of these two Dianas, it sums to 34, or you get 34 days, right? Diana equals 34 in reverse reduction. The name Carroll sums to 34 in standard reduction. Also notice the 79. The word murder sums to 34 and 79. And if you measure from Diahann Carroll's most recent birthday to her death, you get 79 days. Now, I'm glad I didn't forget this because I almost did. But check this out. If you measure from the death of Princess Diana, August 31st of 97, to the date Diahann Carroll died, you get a span of exactly 8,070 days. Carroll Diahann Johnson equals 87 in reduction. Wild stuff. All right, so we're at about 20 minutes for this video. It's about as long as I wanted to make it. However, for those of you interested in more about the moon, this is pretty fascinating to me too. Now, we talked about how many months old she was when she died and how it tied into her gematria. But on the Gregorian calendar, our month is not what should be considered a true month, right? Now think about the Hebrew calendar, which is a lunar calendar. Their calendar makes a month either 29 or 30 days, and that's because that's how long a lunar phase is. So each month begins on the date of a new moon. On our calendar in the United States, we don't do things that way. Now, back in the year 1923, people began assigning a number to each new moon. This is called the Brown lunation number. So when you're looking at the table of moon phases here on like calendar12.com, you'll see the lunation number on the right side of the page. So Diahann Carroll died during lunation 1197, and she was born during lunation 155. Well, this means she was 1,042 lunar phases old. And again, remember, eclipse sacrifice equals 142. And we talked about how she was 398 months old on the debut of her show. But you would expect a major moon sacrifice during this particular lunation, 1197, because 1197, believe it or not, is actually a pretty significant number in this study. When you write out 666, it sums to 1197 in Jewish gematria. And 666 is an incredibly significant number to the moon. The moon keeps the Earth on a 66 tilt or a 66.6 degree tilt, measuring from the Earth's axis to its plane to the sun. If you multiply 6 times 6 times 6, you get 216. The moon has an equatorial radius of just about exactly 2,160 miles. The mathematics of the circle, you get 216 and 666, the moon, the big circle in the sky. And recently I discovered, or someone else discovered and brought to my attention, if you add the Gematria of the Roman numerals 2160 to the moon, you also get 666. This 155 is kind of interesting because Diahann Carroll was born during lunation 155. I'll have to edit the end of that post so that it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, how wild is that? The day after I mention, moon numbers being significant to lunar eclipses and the numerology of people's names, we get this death that same day. Pretty interesting stuff. I just realized I didn't look at a single prime number in this video. That's got to be the first time that's ever happened. But there's definitely some significance to them here. I'm just looking at the name Diahann Carroll, 67, the same as human sacrifice. Well, 67 is a prime number. The 19th, she died in the year 2019. She died of breast cancer, which equals 109. So I'm sure there's definitely more here if someone wants to decode her victory at the Tonys in 1962. 1962 is an interesting year because 62 is one of the values of sacrifice, 62. But it's definitely synced up with the death of Princess Diana, believe it or not. I don't know how it works. I don't know who's doing it. But it's happening. No doubt. Thanks to everybody who jumped in. Not many of you. I hope most of you are just enjoying your Saturday and not too concerned with numbers. But someone's got to do the work. Someone's got to decode this stuff and get it out there because it's fascinating stuff. And I think it tells us a lot about the reality that we live in. Thanks again to everybody. Peace, love, God bless. And we'll talk to you next time. See ya.